Husband Syed, his pregnant wife, was boring. She sold his company while he slept with Mistress. They say marriage is a journey, a sacred promise woven by two souls who vow to weather life's storms side by side. But what happens when betrayal slithers into the heart of that promise? What happens when cruelty and greed push an unsuspecting spouse into the darkest corner of heartbreak and then force her to fight back with a vengeance? Today's story rips aside the curtain on a seemingly perfect couple. He called his pregnant wife boring, mocking her devotion and ignoring her needs, while sneaking away with another woman. Little did he know, he had awakened a fury that would change his life forever. Jake Donovan was not always the antagonist he would soon become. Once upon a time, he was simply a bright-eyed dreamer with ambitions of making it big. Born in a small Californian town, Jake spent his teenage years poring over business magazines, idolizing tech moguls like Elon Musk and Mark Cuban, and sketching out hypothetical business plans. He was especially proud of the one that eventually turned into Genesis Innovations, the company that would skyrocket him to a level of success he had once only dreamed of. Alice Donovan nee McAllister met Jake in college. She was an English major with a keen eye for detail and a compassionate heart. Alice was the one who, after reading Jake's first ideas, said, "You have the potential to change the world." Her unwavering faith stoked Jake's self-confidence like never before. When they started dating, their love was genuine, raw, and bursting with possibilities. Their friends would tease them, calling them the campus power couple. Jake's intelligence and ambition blended perfectly with Alice's empathy and creativity. If you asked anyone back then, they would have sworn that these two were destined for a lifetime of happiness. However, life has a way of testing the mightiest bonds. In the early days, the relationship was near picture perfect. Neither had a problem working hard or sacrificing luxuries to see the other achieve their dreams. Alice took on extra tutoring jobs to help support Jake when he was working on prototypes and business pitches. Jake, for his part, was grateful. He often called her his better half, the anchor to his sometimes dizzying ambitions. When Jake finally pitched Genesis Innovations to a group of local investors, including a well-known angel investor named Kevin Liu, it was Alice's well-crafted presentation deck that set it apart from the usual dryness of startup pitches. Although Jake's technological approach to solar-powered devices was impressive on its own, Alice's ability to tell a compelling story about sustainability and the future of green energy won hearts. Overnight, they attracted a pool of eager investors, and Genesis Innovations was born. For a while, it was just the two of them building something incredible. They operated from their cramped apartment, hustling day and night. Alice's background in writing and communications gave her the perfect skill set for forging partnerships and marketing campaigns. Jake handled the technological and operational side of things. In those early years, love guided them through sleepless nights. They saw each setback as a building block for future success. They overcame 1,000 no's before landing the big yes. Even as the business grew, they remained a united team. Then came a wave of success that was almost dizzying. Genesis Innovations took off, closing deals with environmental organizations, lining up to supply solar solutions to small companies, and eventually capturing the eye of a major energy conglomerate for a strategic partnership. Alice and Jake married in a simple yet heartwarming ceremony at a beach in Santa Barbara with just close friends and family in attendance. They took humble vows, whispering to each other promises that felt unbreakable in that golden sunset. Family members like Alice's father, Robert McAllister, and Mother Teresa beamed with pride. On Jake's side, his mother, Linda, teared up, remembering the starry-eyed teen who once dreamed so big. All seemed well. Nobody could have predicted the heartbreak that was inching around the corner. Success can be a double-edged sword. As Genesis Innovations grew, so did Jake's social circle and his ego. Business dinners turned into late-night gatherings, with Jake's new clique praising him as the visionary genius behind the company. He began believing his own hype, losing the humility that once made him so endearing. Alice noticed the small changes first. Instead of conferring with her about major decisions, Jake started announcing them at the last minute. The once sweet, "I'd love your input," turned into, "I already discussed it with the board." Where she was once his partner in every sense, Alice now felt sidelined. More often than not, Jake's attention was swallowed by phone calls from corporate bigwigs. Then came the distancing. Alice, ever the optimist, initially thought that Jake was simply overworked. She made excuses for him: long days, high stakes, people tugging him in all directions. She told herself that once things settled, they'd go back to the way they were. But things never settled. The more successful Genesis Innovations became, the more Jake lost sight of his roots. She would reach out to hold his hand, and he would be lost in a flurry of text messages. She would ask how his day went, and he'd give her a cursory nod before burying himself in spreadsheets. She tried talking to him. "Jake," she would say softly over dinner, "remember how we used to brainstorm together? That synergy we shared? I miss that." Jake would shrug. "Things are different now. The company's bigger. More responsibilities." His tone dismissed her concerns as petty or naive. Alice felt that every time she tried to mend the growing gap, Jake was adding bricks to the wall between them. When Alice got pregnant, she saw a glimmer of hope. Surely Jake would celebrate the news of a baby with as much enthusiasm as he once poured into business deals. It was her dream to start a family, and earlier in their relationship, Jake had shared that dream. She pictured them painting a nursery together, baby-proofing the house, and reading parenting books side by side. Jake's reaction was lukewarm at best. He congratulated Alice with a brief hug and a quick, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." But his phone rang not even a minute later, pulling him away into the hallway as he hammered out the details of a new contract. The glow Alice felt was short-lived. She felt alone in her joy. Over the next few weeks, Jake's actions made it painfully clear that fatherhood was not his priority. He was busier than ever, traveling to conferences in New York, Tokyo, and London. While Alice attended prenatal checkups, Jake was busy schmoozing with investors. She started reading baby books on her own and prepping the nursery in their spacious Los Altos home. Still, she hung onto hope Jake would come around once he laid eyes on their child, right? Yet things took an even more disturbing turn. At social events, she would notice how Jake's eyes would wander to other women. He'd talk to them with a spark in his eye, a charm she remembered so well from the early days of their relationship. Afterward, if she questioned him, he'd snap, "You're just imagining things. Stop being paranoid." He offered no real comfort, no reassurance. The tension in the house grew so thick, Alice sometimes spent nights awake, silently crying, wondering where it all went wrong. In the rare moments they shared a meal, Jake was either texting, calling, or complaining about how boring family life could be. To her, it felt like heartbreak in slow motion. Behind the scenes, though, Alice remained strong. She told no one of the pain. Even her mother, Teresa, sensed something was off, but couldn't get a clear answer from her daughter. "We're fine," Alice would lie. "Just a lot on our plates." Yet, for all her attempts at preserving the marriage, she began to realize that Jake might not share those same intentions anymore. The moment Alice's suspicions crystallized into harsh reality was when she found a lipstick-stained handkerchief in Jake's gym bag. It was a shade of bright red she never wore. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was from a random co-worker who borrowed his towel. But the faint whiff of an expensive perfume, unrecognizable to her, destroyed the last shred of doubt. Confronting him yielded predictable results. "You're imagining things," Jake barked, rolling his eyes as though dealing with a hysterical child. "This is from a networking event. Some woman used my handkerchief for a second. Stop making a big deal out of nothing. Alice wanted to believe him, she truly did, but her instincts, sharpened by heartbreak, knew better. She decided to investigate further. She scrolled through his social media activity, something she never felt the need to do before. Nothing incriminating. But then she remembered that Jake had used an old phone for some of his personal stuff and rarely touched it anymore. When she checked, she found messages revealing a name, Rebecca Harding. A series of texts between Jake and Rebecca painted a harrowing picture of flirty rendezvous, late-night calls, and explicit longing. She felt her heart plummet into her stomach. The messages were layered with detailed restaurant meetups, a weekend at some exotic spa, and even petty complaints about Alice's pregnancy taking a toll on Jake's social life. "She's always tired," one message read. Another vile line read, "It's like living with a roommate, not a wife." So boring. When Alice read those words, tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. All this time she had been chalking up Jake's absence to business commitments, to the stress of running a big company, but the truth was simpler and more brutal. He found her boring now that she was pregnant. He preferred the thrill of a mistress to the warmth of his wife's unwavering love. Alice spent the next few days in a haze, heartbreak colliding with disbelief and anger. She considered confronting him again with this new evidence, but given his dismissiveness, she knew it would accomplish nothing. Instead, a more potent question surfaced in her mind. What is my next move? Alice reached out for help in the most discreet way possible. She contacted a close family friend, Ava Parker, an attorney with expertise in corporate law. Ava had known Alice for years and had always admired her tenacity and intelligence. She was also aware of the intense work Alice put into building Genesis Innovations. Sitting in Ava's small but well-appointed office, Alice recounted everything: the shift in Jake's behavior, the mistress, the texts, and the heartbreak. Ava listened intently, her expression a mixture of sympathy and steely resolve. When Alice finished, Ava leaned forward and asked, "What do you want to do about Genesis? The company is in both your names, right?" Technically, Jake had structured the business as a joint venture early on, awarding Alice nearly half the shares for her contributions. Over time, though, Jake began handling most of the board dealings and critical decisions, gradually marginalizing Alice's role. The company was now valued at over $100 million. If they were to divorce, Alice would be entitled to her share. But she had another idea. "You don't have to let him walk all over you," Ava said, eyes gleaming with a protective fury. "You put just as much into that business as he did. Don't let him pretend otherwise." Alice nodded, tears threatening to spill. "He's humiliating me, flaunting his mistress in my face, calling me boring. But we built this company together. It was our dream." She took a shaky breath. "If he doesn't value me as a wife, at least I'll make sure he respects me as a partner." Over the next few weeks, under Ava's guidance, Alice began collecting all the paperwork she could find: financial statements, investment contracts, partnership agreements, and memoranda of understanding. She compiled evidence of her contributions, emails showing her strategies for marketing, her involvement in hiring key personnel, and her original pitch decks. She discovered that not only did she own half the shares, but there was a clause allowing her to sell if she ever chose to do so, provided she had the blessing of specific stakeholders, namely early investors, including Kevin Liu. Alice remembered Kevin as a straightforward but fair individual who had taken a liking to her writing approach in the startup pitch. She reached out discreetly. Over a quiet lunch in an unassuming diner, she confided in Kevin about Jake's recent behavior. Kevin had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. He listened, stroking his chin, surprised yet sympathetic. "I always admired your work, Alice," he confessed. "Frankly, I only invested in Genesis because I saw how you two worked as a team. It's sad to hear how things have deteriorated." When Alice explained the possibility of selling her shares, Kevin's eyebrows shot up. "You're serious?" "I'm not making any rash decisions," Alice said carefully, "but if push comes to shove, I need to know my options." Jake's turned into someone I can barely recognize. Kevin leaned back in the booth, swirling his cup of coffee. "Whatever decision you make, you can count on my support." I've never been comfortable with how Genesis has been pivoting of late. I suspect it's all Jake's doing. The energy behind the original vision. That was you. A sense of empowerment coursed through Alice. For once, she felt the glimmer of control returning to her life. She realized she had leverage, a powerful one, and that knowledge softened the sting of Jake's betrayal, if only slightly. Back at home, Jake's behavior continued to spiral. He was no longer cautious about hiding his phone or covering his tracks. Late nights, suspicious phone calls, and text messages had become routine. Alice, determined to keep her composure for the sake of her unborn child, decided to wait until she had all her legal matters lined up. One evening, however, Jake pushed her too far. They were at a lavish corporate party hosted by a major tech partner. Alice, visibly pregnant, was feeling exhausted. She asked Jake if they could leave a bit early. He looked at her with barely masked disgust. "You're always tired these days. This is important for business. Stop being so boring." Alice felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Several business associates glanced in her direction with pitying eyes. She swallowed, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Jake," she said calmly, "I need to go home. I'm not well." Instead of helping her to the car, Jake rolled his eyes and turned to his colleagues with a grin. "She can grab a cab. The night's still young." That was the last straw. Alice took the next available taxi by herself, tears of anger and sorrow threatening to spill down her cheeks. She refused to let them, not in public. Once home, she finally let them flow. She cried for the girl who once believed in love so blindly, for the partnership that was now shattered, and for the baby who might grow up in a broken home. A few hours later, Jake stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. Without a word, he went to shower. In that moment, Alice realized she was done waiting for him to come around. She had to protect herself and her child. She checked her phone. There was a message from Ava. "Meeting with Kevin set for next Thursday. Keep your head up." As she read it, a cool resolve settled inside her. She had to secure her future, even if it meant stepping out of the shadows and asserting her power. And if Jake continued down this path, she wouldn't just leave him, she would show him the weight of consequences. While Alice quietly lined up her strategy, Jake was busy slithering ever deeper into an affair with Rebecca. The two often met at a penthouse suite in San Francisco's financial district, courtesy of one of Genesis Innovation's well-connected partners. Rebecca's father happened to be a financier, and she had grown up around wealth and indulgence. She enjoyed the thrill of stealing a married man away from his obligations, or so it seemed to Alice from the messages and the new rumor mill swirling in hush-hush corporate circles. For Jake, it was a heady mix, being lionized in business circles and simultaneously having a young, flirtatious mistress at his beck and call. Meanwhile, the idea of fatherhood annoyed him. "I'm not ready for all that domestic stuff," he confided to Rebecca once, sipping expensive whiskey from a crystal tumbler. "Being tied down, diapers, crying all night, it's suffocating." Rebecca would giggle, feigning sympathy. In truth, her interest in Jake was transactional. She relished the power she felt in turning the head of a successful entrepreneur. She thrived on watching his marriage crumble from a distance, as if it were a television drama. As soon as she sensed he might become emotionally dependent, she coolly pulled away. Jake would chase her, not wanting to lose the trophy he thought he had acquired. Rumors of the affair reached some of Genesis Innovation's board members. Kevin Liu heard them as well, but kept his mouth shut. He knew something bigger was brewing with Alice's quiet plan. He only hoped that the endgame wouldn't destroy the company entirely, especially since he believed in Alice's original vision. One crisp Thursday morning, Alice and Ava arrived at a secluded conference room in downtown San Francisco. Kevin Liu and a few other original investors were already seated, curious about what Alice had to present. Ava took the lead, showing them the official documentation that outlined Alice's share ownership. She highlighted clauses Jake had apparently glossed over in his pursuit of external capital. Crucially, the founding documents granted Alice the right to sell her shares with the support of the original investors if the marriage partnership dissolved or if she was no longer actively involved in day-to-day operations due to Jake's decisions. "All we need is your approval," Ava stated calmly, eyeing each investor in turn. Alice's portion of the company is significant enough to shift majority control, especially if combined with certain early stakeholders. "We understand you might be concerned, but we want to assure you this is not about dismantling Genesis. It's about realigning leadership to someone who genuinely cares about the founding principles." One investor, Caroline Ortega, who had long questioned Jake's recent leadership style, raised her hand. "If Alice sells, who will buy?" She looked at Alice with an expression of both worry and admiration. Alice took a steady breath. "There's a European consortium interested in sustainable tech acquisitions. They reached out a few months ago to me personally, asking if I'd consider selling partial shares. This was before I knew about Jake's affair, and I refused. But now, given the circumstances, I might be open to a deal on the condition that the original vision for sustainability and social responsibility remains intact." Kevin interjected, "This consortium has a solid track record. They're run by an ex-environmental advisor. From what I know, they'd be an excellent fit to preserve the ethos of Genesis." The investors exchanged thoughtful glances. Most had grown uneasy with Jake's brash approach, especially as it strayed from the environmental and ethical blueprint. One by one, they gave their nods of approval. With their support, Alice's plan was set in motion. A quiet hush fell over the room, as if they all realized they were stepping onto a stage that could irrevocably change Jake's life and possibly the course of Genesis innovations. Finally, Caroline spoke up again, her tone soft. "Alice, I'm sorry for what you're going through. Just know that many of us are behind you. We believed in Genesis because we believed in you too. But if Jake has lost sight, we have to keep our integrity intact." Alice simply nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears of gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you," to the room before gathering her papers. For the first time in a long while, she felt something akin to relief. The next step was orchestrating the sale. Ava coordinated negotiations with the European consortium, known as Evergreen Holdings. They had a track record of investing in promising green tech startups across the globe, focusing on sustainability and corporate responsibility. Alice found their approach refreshing. They valued her input, expressed genuine concern about the direction of Genesis innovations, and seemed eager to return it to its roots if they could buy in. Everything was done with utmost secrecy. Alice feared that if Jake caught wind too soon, he might sabotage the deal or worse. Her pregnancy was also progressing, and the stress weighed heavily on her. Sometimes she wondered if she was pushing herself too far, but every time she felt overwhelmed, she pictured Jake's sneering face, heard him calling her boring, and saw the anguish in her reflection. That steeled her resolve. Jake, meanwhile, was oblivious. He was too busy. The upcoming product launch for Genesis was overshadowed by his constant need to impress new sponsors and his late-night escapades with Rebecca. During board meetings, his arrogance boiled over, sometimes insulting senior team members for minor mistakes. Morale was sinking. Employees who once admired him for his visionary mindset now whispered about his inflated ego and questionable moral compass. One evening, while Alice was resting in bed, Jake sauntered in, reeking of perfume again. He carelessly tossed his jacket onto a chair. Alice glanced at him, a pang of disgust and sadness coursing through her, but she forced her face to remain neutral. "Don't wait up for me this weekend," Jake said nonchalantly, scrolling through his phone. "I'll be in Los Angeles for a conference. Might stay a few extra days for some personal networking." You understand, she didn't reply. She was aware the personal networking meant time with Rebecca. A tiny part of her wanted to scream at him, to rip into him for his blatant disrespect. But she bit her tongue. She needed him to remain oblivious just a little bit longer. She didn't want to give him any reason to poke around the finances or sense the shifting tides among the investors. So she simply turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Jake mumbled something under his breath, something like, "You're always so dull these days," before heading to the bathroom. Alice stared at the wall, silently vowing that she would never again let someone degrade her or take her for granted. She had always believed in quiet strength. Now, that strength was her lifeline. The day of the actual sale was set for the following Wednesday morning at a private law firm in downtown Palo Alto. Security was tight, with NDAs flying left and right. Kevin Liu, Caroline Ortega, and a few other original investors were present to finalize the details with Evergreen Holdings. For their part, Evergreen was excited, having completed due diligence. They saw enormous potential in revamping Genesis's leadership and doubling down on the sustainable side of the product line. Alice arrived dressed in a simple but elegant blazer, her baby bump unmistakable. She felt a mixture of adrenaline and bittersweet longing. Genesis Innovations had been her and Jake's baby before an actual child was on the way. She remembered the sacrifices they made, the nights they spent working side by side. Now she was selling it not just for her own financial security, but to preserve the very soul of the company. When she signed the final documents, she felt her hands tremble. Ava placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. With that signature, Alice effectively transferred her majority stake, combining her own shares with those of the supportive original investors to Evergreen Holdings. The sale netted her a life-changing sum of money, enough to secure her and her unborn child's future 100 times over. But more than that, it was a statement. She was no longer Jake's doormat. The final step was to inform Jake. Ava and Kevin had argued over whether to tip him off earlier, but Alice insisted on following through only once everything was set in stone. She didn't want to give him a chance to block or complicate the deal. With the sale concluded, there was no turning back. Jake was in Los Angeles with Rebecca when the bomb dropped. Late Tuesday night, he'd woken up in a luxurious hotel suite, checking his phone to see a flurry of missed calls from his executive assistant and board members. At first, he ignored them, turning his attention to a giggling Rebecca instead. By morning, though, the calls became too numerous and frantic to ignore. He finally answered the phone to hear the panicked voice of his CFO, Jake. "Call me immediately. There's been a massive shift in shareholder structure." Jake's eyes widened as he listened. The color drained from his face. According to the CFO, a new investor group, Evergreen Holdings, had just acquired a controlling stake in Genesis Innovations. What's more, it seemed that Alice, along with several original investors, had orchestrated the sale behind his back. He sputtered, demanding details. The CFO tried to calm him, saying the official meeting to address leadership changes was happening in the office that very day. If Jake wanted answers, he needed to get back to Silicon Valley immediately. Jake swore under his breath. "What the? Alice sold her shares? She can't do that without my permission." But even as he said it, a cold dread settled in. He remembered the founding documents they had drafted years ago, back when trust was unwavering. Alice might have had the legal right, after all. Rebecca stirred under the sheets, batting her eyelashes sleepily. "What's going on?" she asked. Jake shot her a furious glance, yanked on his clothes and muttered, "I have to go. Now." In a matter of hours, he was on a flight back to San Francisco, heart racing, mind spinning. His mistress, momentarily forgotten, stared at the closing hotel door, wondering if she'd just lost her golden ticket. The automatic glass doors of Genesis Innovations hissed open as Jake stormed through the lobby, his footsteps thundering across the marble floor. He ignored the stunned glances from receptionists and employees alike, the echo of his designer shoes punctuating the tense atmosphere. His phone buzzed non-stop in his pocket, but he didn't bother to look. He was already on fire. The boardroom loomed ahead, and Jake flung the door open with such force it hit the wall with a bang. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation. Alice sat at the long conference table, composed and radiant, her pregnant belly a quiet, powerful reminder of everything Jake had ignored. Beside her sat Ava Parker, poised like a legal sword, and Kevin Liu, his expression unreadable. Across from them, members of the Evergreen Holdings delegation sat calmly, papers spread neatly before them. Caroline Ortega was also present, arms crossed, eyes cool. Jake's presence hit the room like a thunderclap. "What the hell have you done?" he barked. Slamming the door shut behind him, Alice didn't flinch. She looked up slowly, her eyes meeting his. "I've done what needed to be done," she replied, her voice calm, almost eerily so. "What you failed to do for months, protect this company's vision, its people, and our family." Jake's face twisted in disbelief. "You sold your shares to them without even talking to me." He looked around wildly. "This is my company. You had no right." Ava leaned forward. "Actually, Jake, she did. According to the founding documents you signed, Alice was within full legal bounds to sell her shares with board approval, which she now has." Jake's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring. "This is betrayal, treason." "No," Kevin interjected coolly. "You betrayed this company when you started running it like your personal playground. You forgot why we started this to make a difference." "Alice never forgot. You don't know what you're talking about," Jake snapped. "I built this from the ground up, while she played house." Alice's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded. "I didn't play house, Jake. I sacrificed. I supported you. I created the branding, the partnerships, the investor relationships you now take for granted. And when I became pregnant with our child, your child, you called me boring." There was a hush in the room. The air itself seemed to still. Jake's voice faltered. "Alice, No," she interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't apologize now because you're cornered. Save it for someone who still believes you mean it." He looked around, grasping for support, but found only silent faces. Caroline finally spoke. "Jake, we gave you chances. We tried to reason with you. But your ego blinded you. You stopped listening. You made unilateral decisions, insulted colleagues, and neglected your responsibilities as CEO and as a partner. We can't trust your leadership anymore." Jake's voice dropped, desperate. "So what happens now? You replace me? You take everything?" A woman from Evergreen, Dr. Helene Schubert, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Donovan, we are prepared to offer you a consultant role, should you choose to stay. But the CEO position is being reassigned. You can retain some shares or sell them at fair market value. That's your choice." Jake stood there, shoulders rising and falling, breathing hard like a boxer between rounds. "You planned this," he hissed at Alice. "You waited until I was out of town, distracted, to gut me from the inside." Alice stared at him for a long, hard moment. Then she said, quietly, "You gutted us long before this day came." For a second, something shifted in Jake's expression, pain, maybe, recognition. But it passed quickly, replaced by bitterness. "So that's it? This is who you are now?" "No," Alice replied, her voice soft but steady. "This is who I've always been. You just stopped seeing it." Jake turned, hands clenched at his sides. For a moment he seemed unsure whether to scream or collapse. Then, without another word, he walked out of the boardroom. The silence that followed was profound, like the stillness after a storm. Ava exhaled slowly. Kevin nodded in quiet respect. Alice sat back in her chair, her hands resting gently on the curve of her stomach. For the first time in a long time, she felt powerful, not because she had won, but because she had finally chosen herself. News of the sale spread like wildfire. Business insiders were shocked that Alice Donovan, who had been so overshadowed, had pulled off such a coup. Some admired her for it, seeing it as a justified stand for fairness and principle. Others gossiped that she was a cold-hearted woman who had used her pregnancy as leverage. But most recognized the bigger picture. Jake Donovan had let success go to his head, forgetting the foundations of his own dream and the woman who had built it with him. Jake tried to save face, issuing a press release, claiming he was stepping down to focus on personal endeavors. However, rumors about his affair seeped through corporate circles. He was forced to watch as his reputation crumbled, not just because he lost control of Genesis Innovations, but because word got out that he had shamed his pregnant wife in front of colleagues and neglected her for a fling. Rebecca quickly distanced herself. She ghosted him, refusing to answer calls or texts. When Jake showed up at her condo, the doorman turned him away. She had already found another potential suitor, someone with fewer complications and more glamorous connections. Meanwhile, employees at Genesis experienced a renewed sense of optimism. Evergreen Holdings replaced top-level managers who were merely Jake's yes-men. They invited Alice to stay on as a consultant or creative advisor if she wished, honoring her original contributions. She smiled, though she wasn't yet sure how deeply she wanted to be involved going forward. She was preparing for the birth of her child, and that was her primary focus. One evening, while collecting the last of her things from the old office she had once shared with Jake, Alice felt a pang of sadness. On the desk was a framed photo of the two of them from their college days, wide-eyed, hopeful, in love. She gently placed it in a box, unsure if she'd keep it or throw it away. The memories still mattered, but she couldn't let them hold her back. Jake's downfall accelerated. He had always lived lavishly fast cars, expensive suits, luxury penthouses. Now he struggled to maintain those expenses. Although he received a hefty sum from selling his remaining shares to Evergreen, legal tangles, taxes, and poor money management eroded much of it. His attempts to start a new venture floundered. Investors were wary of his mercurial temperament and the bad press swirling around his personal life. Worse still, the sense of betrayal he felt made him bitter. He tried to pin blame on Alice, calling her out in private rants to anyone who'd listen, but people saw through it. The sympathy was with Alice, the pregnant wife he had publicly derided. The more he tried to shift the narrative, the more people shook their heads at his lack of self-awareness. Meanwhile, Alice secured a comfortable home in a serene suburb, focusing on her upcoming motherhood. She wasn't entirely free of emotional burden, of course. The dissolution of her marriage stung deeply, but therapy sessions and support from close friends kept her spirits up. She often thought about the life lessons she'd gleaned from the ordeal, never to lose one's sense of self, never to underestimate the power of quiet resolve. Near the time of her due date, Jake tried one last time to contact her. He showed up unannounced at her new place. Alice answered the door, her belly prominent, and looked at the man who once meant everything to her. He appeared disheveled, eyes hollow. "Alice," he said, voice cracking, "Can we talk?" She regarded him with measured calm. "What do you want, Jake?" He swallowed hard, tears threatening to appear. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm messed up. I'm losing it all, my reputation, my company, you." He paused, looking at her stomach. "And I want to be there for the baby." Alice closed her eyes, fighting a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her felt pity, another part felt anger. She opened the door a little wider, letting him in. They talked for over an hour. Mostly, Jake apologized, stumbling over words that once would have come easily to him if he had been genuine. She listened, unsure how much of his regret was real versus the desperation of a man whose life had imploded. In the end, she told him, "I won't deny you the chance to know your child, but I need consistency. No drama. The moment you introduce chaos or infidelity, I'm cutting contact. Our baby deserves stability." Jake nodded, tears spilling. He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. "That's all I can offer you right now," she said softly. "Any trust we had is broken." He left, looking chastened, but whether he'd truly change or not remained a mystery. Alice silently resolved that her boundaries would be firm. Love might have once connected them, but it was no longer the same. A month after the storm had passed, under a clear April sky, Alice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Oliver McAllister Donovan, honoring her family name, the one that grounded her before Jake ever came into her life. The delivery was long but uneventful, a welcome contrast to the emotional roller coaster of the past year. As the nurse placed the warm, wriggling infant in her arms, Alice's eyes brimmed with tears. But this time they weren't from heartbreak or rage, they were from awe. She looked down at Oliver, so tiny and perfect, his fingers curling instinctively around hers. In that moment, something shifted. All the chaos, all the betrayal, all the nights spent doubting herself, they fell away, like leaves shaken loose in a strong wind. Here in her arms was proof that love could still bloom after devastation. He was her fresh start, her second chance. Jake arrived at the hospital later that day, holding a bouquet of white lilies and wildflowers. He looked awkward, like a guest who wasn't sure if he should have come. His eyes landed on Oliver and softened in a way Alice hadn't seen in years. "May I?" he asked, voice hesitant. Alice nodded once. Jake stepped forward, gently cradling his son for the first time. A hush fell over the room as father and son locked eyes. Jake's composure faltered, his shoulders slumped, and tears traced down his cheeks. He kissed Oliver's forehead and whispered something inaudible. "I was a fool," he finally said, looking at Alice. "I didn't realize what I had until I threw it all away." She didn't respond right away. There was a time when those words would have shattered her. Now, they just echoed. "I believe you're sorry," she said at last. "But that doesn't mean I can forget everything that happened. Our son deserves a stable, peaceful life. That's my priority now." Jake nodded, unable to argue. "I want to be part of his life. If you'll let me." "You can," Alice said, "but it's on my terms. No chaos, no games. If you show up fully. If not, don't come at all." Jake didn't protest. He simply nodded again, as if he knew he was walking a tightrope of his own making. He stayed for a while, but Alice eventually asked for time to rest. He left quietly, the scent of flowers lingering in his place. The days that followed were tender, if exhausting. Alice navigated sleepless nights, midnight feedings, and emotional waves of vulnerability, but she did it all with an inner strength that had been forged in fire. Friends dropped by with casseroles, diapers, and warm embraces. Her mother, Teresa, stayed for a week to help. Caroline Ortega visited with a bundle of organic baby clothes and lavender-scented lotion. Even Kevin Liu sent over a sleek, solar-powered baby monitor, an inside joke that made Alice laugh for the first time in days. Professionally, her world was shifting again too. Evergreen Holdings reached out to offer her a long-term, creative consultant role. They wanted her input on rebranding Genesis's new AI-integrated solar panel line, ironically, an idea that she and Jake had once brainstormed over late-night takeout and scribbled on napkins. The difference was, this time, her input wouldn't be diminished or sidelined. She agreed to the offer, but with clear boundaries. "My time is limited," she told them. "I have a newborn now. "I'll work, but on my schedule." They didn't hesitate. "You've earned that," Kevin said warmly, "and frankly, you're the voice this company needs." As the weeks passed, Alice began to settle into her new rhythm. She'd take Oliver on stroller walks through quiet tree-lined neighborhoods, the sun kissing his cheeks while she sipped lukewarm coffee from her thermos. On some mornings, she'd open her laptop while he napped and draft branding concepts or marketing campaigns, still sharp, still inspired, but with a clarity that came only from knowing who she was and what she deserved. The pain hadn't vanished completely. Some nights she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories of what Jake once was. She hadn't thrown away the framed photo of them from college, bright-eyed, idealistic, wrapped in love, but she'd tucked it deep into a drawer she rarely opened. She couldn't erase the past, but she no longer let it control her. Jake visited a few more times, always brief and on schedule. He seemed calmer, sobered by the enormity of what he'd lost. Whether his change would last remained to be seen. Alice no longer depended on it. One quiet afternoon, as she rocked Oliver in his nursery, painted soft shades of sage and cream, she whispered to him, "You're going to grow up knowing your worth. No one will ever make you feel small." She kissed his forehead, feeling the warmth of new beginnings. In the end, Alice had lost a husband, but she had gained a future. A real one. One where she was no longer someone's shadow, no longer just the pregnant wife dismissed as dull. She was a mother, a builder, a strategist, and above all, someone who had rewritten her own story, not out of vengeance, but from the unyielding roots of love and self-respect. Months turned into a year. Genesis Innovations, under new leadership, underwent a renaissance, returning to its environmentally focused mission. Evergreen Holdings invested heavily in research, sparking breakthroughs in community-based solar projects. Kevin Liu and Caroline Ortega stayed on the board, ensuring Alice's vision continued to live on in spirit. Jake Donovan tried venturing into other startups, but couldn't escape his tarnished reputation. Potential partners either shunned him or demanded unfavorable terms. He struggled with finances after a couple of failed business attempts. Yet in a small corner of his heart, he realized that he had no one to blame but himself. Little by little, he tried to mend his relationship with Alice and Oliver, offering child support regularly, showing up for scheduled visitations and maintaining a civil tone. They were baby steps, but they were steps nonetheless. Whether the damage could ever be fully undone was uncertain. For Alice, the future shimmered with possibility. She had a beautiful son, enough financial independence to live without worry, and the satisfaction of knowing she had stood up for herself. She felt a tinge of sorrow for the broken marriage, but she chose to focus on gratitude for the lessons learned, the friends who had rallied around her, and the child who represented hope. Every so often, she would reminisce about the early days when she and Jake were partners in every sense. She still had that framed photo tucked away in a drawer. It was a reminder of what once was and a testament to how drastically people can change. She had no intention of forgetting the past. It had shaped her, but she refused to let it define her future. And so, in the end, the man who called his pregnant wife boring learned the hard way that belittling someone you once loved and betraying them is a sure path to ruin. Alice showed the world that resilience can wear many faces. Sometimes it's silent, sometimes it's loud, but when it strikes, it can change destinies. She might have lost her marriage, but she found her voice, and that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster, where heartbreak, betrayal, and redemption collided in a story of quiet resilience. We witnessed how Alice, labeled as boring by her unfaithful husband, refused to bow to humiliation and instead fought back in the most extraordinary way, by selling the very company they built together. Her strength and intelligence not only safeguarded her future, but also reclaimed her dignity. If you found this story inspiring, or if it stirred you in any way, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with friends who could use a reminder that quiet courage can spark powerful transformations. And consider subscribing to this channel so you won't miss out on future stories of drama, empowerment, and life lessons. Together, let's keep these important conversations going. Your engagement truly helps this community flourish. Thank you, and see you next time.